So welcome everybody to Sportsman's Direct again, and we're going to continue trying to do seminars like these. The last one was a great success, so we had a lot of guys in the audience that wanted us to talk about nightcrawler harnesses, which I was kind of really surprised with all the topics out there to talk about, that nightcrawler harnesses, fish and crawler harnesses would come up as a topic that they wanted us to talk about. And then I started thinking about it, and I started writing down some notes, and I thought, well, gosh, there's an awful lot of stuff that we take for granted, or I take for granted, that a lot of guys may not know about or may not have thought about, right? And I guess that's the way it is with everything, that once you've been doing it for so long, you kind of forget, you don't realize what you've really learned over the years, and it becomes second nature. But if you can help somebody maybe skip over some of that learning curve, you can make their time out there on the water, much more successful. So one of my goals was to have somebody up here with me, and this is a little bit different format than we did last time. Last time when Isaac spoke, it was just kind of a more traditional seminar where a guy gets up and he's got kind of a line of thought that he's going to follow, and he's going to talk about it. But we're going to try something a little different at this seminar and going forward. And that's going to be kind of more interactive, where there'll be more than one guy up here. Generally, my plan is to have me kind of as more of a moderator, and that's why we had Rob was going to be here with us today as well, but since he can't make it, got called into work, it's just going to be the two of us. And I'm introduced Don Murray here from Lake St. Clair Walleye Association. And yeah, Don.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
He's got his followers out there. But Don he's a wealth of experience for fishing out here on Lake St. Clair. And I know Don fishes crawler harnesses. And there's, not everybody fishes crawler harnesses. A lot of guys are like more crankbait oriented, but I know Don does all of it. And so that's why I wanted to have Don up here as one of our guests to kind of bounce some questions off of him. And we're going to kind of try to just share some experience with you guys, and hopefully it will make you more productive when you're out there on the water. And hopefully there'll be a few things after tonight that you'll hear that maybe you haven't thought of before. So I got a new phone here, so we'll see how this is going to work for me. It's got this stupid facial ID, and I got notes on here, so it's going to keep turning off on me probably. But one of the things I thought about actually kind of after the fact, when I started taking my notes is, and I should preface this, Don does not know what I'm going to ask him. He does not know what the topics are or what's on my notes, which could be kind of fun. But so, one of the things I thought about was with fishing nightcrawler harnesses for walleyes is, can you think of any like do's or don'ts that you come to mind, especially the don'ts? Is there anything that you could tell like some of these guys out here not to do with harnesses that you've learned the hard way maybe that
the biggest thing is too many hooks. That's especially with weeds. If you don't have a lot of weeds, you can get away with it and stuff. But just too many hooks, it just aggravates me. You get hung up all the time. And then the little perches just eat you alive out there sometimes. But all fish will hit them though, but just too many hooks sometimes. So there was years and years ago, there used to be a guide around here. Remember Joe Breyer? Remember that name?
Yep.
I seen a seminar he did, I don't know, God, this got to be 30 years ago. And he had a single hook, and that was it. And we had it seemed like we had more weeds at times out here. But he used a three-way setup with a single hook harness, and he just drag it through the weeds and stuff, and them fish are just living in there sometimes. So if you can't get to them with too many hooks, that single hook, it gets through a lot of stuff.
So you're not a three-hook guy for sure then, right?
No, I used to be.
And what Don's talking about is the actual numbers of hooks.
Yeah, on the actual harness, yeah.
I remember you talking to that guy.
Yeah, on the harness itself, And years ago, they used to make them with 3 hooks, and they started cutting them down just to 2 hooks so you could get the snake out there, type of thing. And then Joe, I bought some of his harnesses to study them, really, to make some for my own for the following spring and stuff. And you'd be surprised, that single hook. You guys know that you ever take a worm and see the mouth on a worm? You ever do that? You know, you take the head of the worm, you got it in your finger, and you tap on his nose or his mouth, and all of a sudden you'll see a little hole open up. So that's the head of the worm, and some guys will take that hook and they'll, you know, like this, basically, into the worm, or they'll cut them in half and use the head part. You thread that on backwards. So you got maybe just a 1/4 inch of worm hanging off the end of it. And it's pulsating and moving. I call it life movement. Them fish know what's going on down there. And you'd be surprised. Just drag that all over the place. You can run them off of planer boards or anything, but especially a lot of weed stuff. That's what I'm saying. The biggest thing is too many hooks, because fish like meat, and you put that meat right in their face, basically, and they eat them up.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I'm a single hook sometimes, never 3 hook, mostly 2 hook.
Yeah.
And that thing about finding the worm's mouth, because that was one of my notes in here was going to be about how do you hook a worm, because a lot of guys I mean, you got a big night crawler. There's a whole bunch of different ways you can hook the night crawler, but I like going right through the mouth too. Yeah. And if it's on a smaller single hook, but if I'm fishing a normal 2 hook rig, it goes through the mouth and just through and just out, and then down, usually right around where the heart is. You guys know where that lump is, right? So usually right around that lump, with the spread of that 2 hook rig, usually got about 2-3 inches between the hooks, right? So and then you get that second hook in there, and I usually like to just push it through, not like through and out. I mean, if you're fishing a big single hook, almost hook it like a rubber worm hook, like you would use. It come out and then sometimes back through, so that the hook is protected, so that you can get through the weeds. So you're fishing it kind of weedless. And then there's that other hook that's out there now, everybody, that's slow death, right? That's a single hook, a big single hook. Same kind of deal.
I love slow death hooks. They're really good. Even with 2 hook harnesses, then, because you get that swirling effect, like those salmon guys with the meat rig type of thing. Those slow death hooks work pretty good too, but single hooks get through a lot of stuff. You got a lot less aggravation, and you'll catch everything on them, muskies included, everything.
So I know that was an unexpected don't or a do, I guess, however you want to take it. That could be a do or a don't, right? Do use less hooks. And one of the things that I was thinking about, and I've seen guys do this out on the water, as far as a don't, is take the night crawler harness. Maybe it could be on a bottom bouncer, it could be on a 3-way rig. I mean, that's all topics. But they'll take it and they'll just either flip it out to the side of the boat and just let it go straight to the bottom, right? Or they'll be off the side of the boat and they'll open up, if it's a spinning reel, they open it up and they just let it go right to the bottom. And I see guys out there shaking their heads, right? That's definitely a don't. Mm-hmm. And the big don't, if you don't know what we're talking about, the reason why is when you just let that harness go like that and it free falls, you don't know where that harness is going to end up. And especially when it hits the bottom, you can just end up with a tangled, massive craziness down there, right? This massive tangle. And then now your boat kicks in, and you're just pulling this massive tangled mess along for however long until you bring it up and you realize it's all tangled up, right? So the do part of that, the don't was don't throw it free spool. The do is let it down.
Yeah, pay it out. Yeah,
pay it out on a nice controlled feed so that it's under tension and everything stays perfect until it either gets to the depth you want it to, or it gets down to the bottom with a bottom bouncer. Yeah. Or
that's true. Like these, I hardly ever use these. They're good, don't get me wrong, but I make just a pencil sinker, 2, 3, 4 ounce. I make my own leaders with a 3-way.
Yep.
And that sinker, it's on the bottom, it's just banging and dragging. This, like John's saying, if you let it down quick or something, hits like this, it can go this way, and to me, it's hard to kind of feel where you're at. In rocks or something, it's okay, but Lake St. Clair, we got tons of weeds out here. So if you just got that one sinker, it hits down there. Sometimes you get in that real snotty, mushy kind of weeds. It's not like the cabbage weeds or anything. It just kind of feels mushy. So you get that sinker down there, you can feel it better versus, you know, this wire hitting this thing wobbling around like a hula girl or something. And it just rips through weeds and stuff. I don't know if it shakes them up and they see that harness coming through and stuff, and they whack them pretty good though, that's for sure. But it's all meat to them is what I tell everybody. But basically they can tell that worm is alive, believe me, they can tell. And these plastic worms, they'll work too at times, no problem. But sometimes they get the scent, I guess, or something. But yeah, just don't let it down real quick. But even the single hook ones, you can get away with it a little bit easier anyhow, without getting all tangled up. But yeah.
One of the other ones that I thought of too is that I don't know if a lot of guys pay attention to it is, you know, whatever nightcrawler harness you're using, and all nightcrawler harnesses not only have hooks and have a blade and have beads, but they also have a clevis, right? Which allows your blade to spin freely. And here, I know one of the times of the year that drives me absolutely nuts, and it's usually right when the walleye fishing gets going really good out here in the main lake, we get all these cottonwoods, right? And so you get all these cottonwood seeds all over the surface of the water, and I'll tell you, it doesn't take many cottonwood seeds to really screw up the movement on one of them nightcrawler harnesses. And it affects that clevis on there. It affects anything that spins that you got out there, whether it's a ball bearing swivel or what gumped up on your reels and everything. Algae, I mean, we get a lot of algae blooms and stuff out here too. That algae will get down there on that clevis. So one of the key things that I like to focus on is to make sure I keep that darn thing clean down there on the clevis on the business end of things. And one of the ways you can do that, I mean, you can't prevent the stuff that's like floating halfway up and down in the water column, but keeping like, your three-way rig that you were talking about, right? Or the bottom bouncer rig, a lot of your stuff coming down your line is going to collect here, right? So whether you're using a three-way or a bottom bouncer rig, and hopefully it doesn't get down there by the clevis. So the more points of contact that you have, the less chance you have of it making down there. And one of the other tricks that I used to, don't do it so much now with everybody running boards and everything, but back in the day when trolling for walleyes was just a one-hand operation, right? That rod tip, keep it down in the water, and then let all that garbage collect right up there on your rod tip, whether it's weeds or algae or whatnot, and then it doesn't flow down the line, it doesn't get down there and mess your clevis up so much. So,
especially them floating weeds when they start breaking off.
Yep.
But another thing you do on your fishing pole, on the main line itself, put a bead on there, and then your swivel tied to that. So if your line's in the water on a 45, let's say, or something, it'll start collecting on there also. Like John's saying, just different points to stop it from getting down to the good part.
Yeah. Gets more quality time down in the water, right? That's one of the whole keys to everything. It doesn't matter what kind of fishing you're doing, you want to try to get that time that your bait is down in the water as productive as you possibly can. So it's all them little things that adds up to putting more fish in the box.
Yes, indeed.
So
definitely.
So one of the first key things that I wanted to talk about, especially it's very appropriate for right now where we are timing-wise out here on Lake St. Clair and the Detroit River. So we are mid-April right now, and we got a major warm front coming in. And the reason why most guys aren't here right now for the seminar is because I know there's a ton of guys right now that are jigging for walleyes on the Detroit River because it's jigging time. So it's early season, water temperatures in the low 40s, and if you were to ask somebody if they were going walleye fishing today what they're going to do, they're going to tell you they're going to go jigging. I almost guarantee you that. And so the question I got for you, Don, is, so when do we start trolling nightcrawler harnesses? When do you start trolling nightcrawler harnesses?
I've done it now. Oh, you could do it now. A lot of that jigging stuff, them fish are in the river just pre-spawning, spawning, whatever and everything. And you can get down there in 40 feet of water, you can see some green weed down there now. So you could actually bottom bounce through there now, or get out in the lake. I don't know how the lake is right now, because when they really get into the spawning thing, they're all hanging around in one area, but I gotta believe there's some out in the lake now. And you could pull harnesses, bottom bouncing, or just with a little inline weight, sometimes you get in them areas, you just let out maybe 50 feet of line with a split shot with a harness, or just a lightweight and shallow. Because they're in there looking around to eat stuff. They'll hit them now. But most guys are doing the jigging thing, and me, I'm doing that and pulling bandits and stuff too. But you could do it now though. I've done it in the past, so you could do it now if you wanted to. But it's like everything in fishing. One day, one thing works better than another. And you just got to be versatile with stuff in your toolbox, as they say.
Now, last year for us in here was the first year that I can remember how early the nightcrawler harness bite started. And what I mean is when the guys really started using the nightcrawler harnesses, and it was the guides. And they had, it was probably about this time last year. And the water conditions were such that the jig and bite was tough. And the fish were deep. I think we had clear water last year, if I remember right. We had really super clear water this time last year. The fish were really deep. You got your fish, the jiggers only got their fish first thing in the morning. Once the sun came up, it was done and the fish went deep. And so you had all these guides and they're trying to do double books. They're trying to do double trips. So they're trying to get their clients on fish as fast as they can in the morning. And what those guides figured out was, well, you know what? Pulling crawler harnesses, we can outfish our, we can get better response from these fish pulling harnesses than we can jigging right now. Yep. So I had guides coming in that had never drug a crawler harness probably in their life, and they were buying equipment for running night crawler harnesses, and they were running crawler harnesses in the Detroit River last year at this time, and just pulling limits of fish like in 30 feet of water out there.
Oh yeah, 30, 45 foot of water. It got so clear last year. Some of them guys are leaving at like 3 in the morning, but that's some dedicated customers there though. But yeah, they started pulling them bottom bouncers and stuff, and you could do it right now. I know you could, but the water was so clean then. But like I was saying, one day one thing will work good, next day something else might work a little better. And them fish, it was tough last year. They just in the river, I'm saying, they just didn't want to hit a jig after it got 5:30 in the morning or something. It was crazy. But yeah, they had bottom bouncers and stuff. They all worked. You can do this into July down there in the river pulling bottom bouncers and stuff. So it does work though. Like I say, it's got meat in their face, that's for sure.
Yeah, so probably one of the key things, especially at like this time of the year, to bear in mind though, if you wanted to pull crawler harnesses, is just the speed. Okay, generally when this water is colder like it is now, you're going to be slower. Everything is going to be a little bit slower. And then the other thing is if you're in the river, and I know Don can probably attest to this, it's trolling in a current with a crawler harness is very different than trolling in the lake. And what can you tell these guys about pulling harnesses in the river?
Well, like John was saying, for that, line counters come in handy, but ease it out as it's going out instead of just letting it free fall, because you never know what you snag up down there, and you ain't fighting that current. You'll just tear up everything. So big thing there is ease it out, that's for sure. And if you got the wind could be against the current, cross the current with it, and so you might have to vary your speed or something. But I tell you, we've been pulling bandits, I'm off the subject a little bit, for the last 5-6 years. November, December, January, February, we're busting ice to get out of the canal to get out there. And when you get down near the mouth, you're going 2 miles an hour anyhow. And you go a little faster to get your baits to work. These fish in 35-degree water are hitting crankbaits. So I don't know if you can go too fast for them, really, to be honest with you. But you got to get the blades spinning is what generally everybody looks for as you're going downstream. And then if you got line counters, you get an idea. It's just ticking, just bouncing, just every once in a while, and then all of a sudden you see whoop, whoop, whoop. It works.
Now that is one of the key things though for the river, right? For me, it's always been trolling downstream.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You don't want to go, for whatever reason, and I ain't quite figured it out yet. I guess maybe because the blades is gonna go too crazy going upstream, right? Because the speed, because you're amplifying everything, right? If you're trolling upstream. So historically, it's been a downstream troll, and usually one of the things you do is drop it back, and you adjust your speed so that you watch your harness blade. Now it's not perfect because your current down at the bottom is going to be a little different at the top, but unless you drop a camera down there, you can't see what your harness blade is doing all the way down at the bottom. So you kind of adjust your trolling speed based on what you see up at the surface with your crawler harness. And you usually run smaller blades. You usually don't run great big like 5s in the, when you're in the current in the river. It's usually like 4s and maybe even downside the 3s. Would you agree with that, Don? Or do you not care? Do you not pay attention to the blade size in the river?
Not really. 4s and 5s usually work pretty good for the most part, that's for sure. I use some of them big 8s and 10s sometimes out in the lake, big thumping type things to maybe attract the fish when I'm open water kind of trolling, so to speak. But yeah, you can just regular blades like we got here. These just the kind of blade, this type of stuff right here. It'll work for you down there. But like I say, ease it down a little bit so you make sure the blade's going spinning somewhat. And then just ease it down, and then once you hit bottom, if you got a line counter, you get a better idea. And just watch it, just keep an eye on it, and it'll just be thumping, and you'll just see some tugging and stuff.
Now, talking about blades a little bit and speed, and one of the things that comes to mind for me is, like, for me personally, blade-wise, I like a blade with a nice deep cup on it, usually because it spins, I think it spins a little bit better at lower speeds. I mean, what do you think about that? Or you don't care, not all that cracked up to be?
I wish I knew I'd be dangerous, that's for sure. But no, there's so many different blades and styles, and in fact, one of the guys in our club, brown bait fish blade, Northland, is that who makes it?
Yeah, I think so.
When the mayflies are going, that thing works really good. Any size.
And that's not a fancy blade either. It's it's not a deep cut blade.
It's just a regular blade.
Yep.
So everybody's got preferences and stuff. And like I say, some days one certain thing works better than others. So I really have no preference myself personally on cupped or non-cupped or whatever, basically. I got a variety of stuff, really.
Let the fish tell you, right? They'll tell you, and then
Pretty
listen
much
to them when they do tell you.
Yeah, and you'll get an idea after you do it enough that you got some that seem to work more often than not, or give you a little bit of reaction anyhow.
Now let's talk a little bit about controlling the boat, as far as, so when you're out there trolling for eyes, I mean, obviously you're going to pick an area, right? You're going to work weed lines, or you're going to work some kind of structure maybe or whatnot, or you're just on a seek and destroy, and you're just out, like sometimes on Erie. Sometimes it's just a matter of covering a bunch of water till you get on a good pot of fish. But a lot of times too, for me, it's about I'm going to troll a certain way, so I'm going to operate the boat. Maybe describe a little bit how you would, what kind of moves are you going to make with the boat? Are you going to run straight line? Are you going to run kind of a pattern? How would you start out working an area?
Well, like I say, your depth finder will tell you what's down there, some weed lines or something, or from past experience, that type of stuff, drop off edges and stuff. It depends on what they look like. You can kind of gauge it from there. But for generally, I just put it out there pretty much straight. I do a little bit of zigzagging, but most of the time the wind is blowing you sideways anyhow. So it's a kind of a combination of things. But for the most part, I just pretty much put them down and just work an area. And if I pop a few and too windy, I'll pull it all up, run back up, come through that same line again, watching your graph type of thing. But I don't do any of that real crazy fancy stuff. I do it at times just by mistake, if you want to call it that. The trolling motor goes bad or something. So you see one, the boat turns or something, you might get an idea if they like it faster or slower, that type of thing.
Bingo, that's what I was hoping you were going to say.
So it's a combination of that kind of stuff. But like I say, generally I just set it up there because the boat's doing all this kind of stuff anyhow. I don't really totally pursue it to do that, but it does happen though at times, yeah.
So you can learn from especially when you're catching fish, right? Or you're not catching fish, but when you are catching fish, a lot of times if you pay attention to a lot of the details when you're trolling, if you're making a turn, like Don was saying. So if I turn to the left, my inside lines are going to slow down, my outside lines are going to speed up. That might be an indicator that the fish want it moving faster or slower based on what side of the boat, which rods go off if you do catch fish. I think sometimes too, and this gets into just kind of how a nightcrawler harness works. It's a spinner, right? So when that thing is pulling faster, the blade's spinning up too, right? So it's throwing off more vibrations and whatnot. But just the opposite too. When you slow down that blade, it might even stop, right? Or it slows down to the point that it's just barely going around, which is one of those things that I always like to think about. There's some of these harness pattern colors are just, these blade colors are crazy, right? Some of them, you look at them and it's like they're a work of art. I mean, it's like somebody took the time to put all those dots inside of the dots and doing all this stuff. When you think about it, when that harness blade is spinning, what do those fish see? They can't see any different than that much different than we do, right? They just see a mass of colors spinning. But when that blade slows down, and maybe it's just going foop, 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 barely going around, they do get to see whatever is on that blade. So then maybe it does matter, right?
Yeah. What another guy in our club, those I can picture him trying to think of what they call them now. The smiley blades. Smiley blades.
Yep.
Those things work super great in super slow conditions and stuff. Sometimes you get out there and just put a smiley blade out there with maybe a little bit of weight, a split shot or not, and drift over some of them weeds. And them smiley blades, they just kind of just keep turning just with not a lot of speed. And ideally, if you're out there trolling, let's say harnesses or something, you pop a couple nice fish in a certain area, hit the waypoint, and then nothing, then you say, well, I'm going to go up here, upwind, let's say. Usually you got wind somehow. Put something out like that, so you're just kind of floating through there. There used to be an old guy, Larry Waters, what's his name, I think?
I think it was.
I seen him when old Admiral Marina was around. Dog day summer, everybody's struggling to get fish and everything, and I'm going down there, I was gonna launch my boat, and I see this little tin boat come up there with 3 guys in it, and they pull his cooler up. And I said, how you guys doing? He opened it up, they had everything. Walleyes, bass, perch, bluegills, everything. I said, what the hell? I mean, what the heck? Where'd you get all these things? In front of Metro Beach when the water warms up in the weeds, and he would take just a split shot, with just a little bit of worm, and just let it float through the weeds. Now, you're not sophisticated like all this stuff seems to be getting nowadays, but it's meat in their face, and you'd be surprised what's in them weeds. They're just waiting for something to grab, and you don't have to. Sometimes they wasn't even using a blade, just a hook with a worm, basically.
He used to catch everything, and he was one of the
He studied it.
original. I mean, when I opened up the first store, he would come in, and I don't think he actually did any seminars there, but he was one of those guys that too. He was always open to learning something new.
Paid attention.
But yeah, he paid attention to the details, and he used to fish a lot of times with just a split shot and a night crawler, single hook it through the nose, through the mouth probably, and throw it out there, and then just almost open bail it, and let the fish pick it up and run with it. So I mean, it's not like really a night crawler harness, but I mean, it's, he definitely kept it simple. I'll tell you.
Yeah,
I'll tell you
really,
that.
definitely that. Yeah.
But yeah, so let's see. Yeah, so anyways, what I was with the boat control and everything, pay attention to the details. You're going to learn things. If you're running into a chop, sometimes think about what that crawler harness is doing down there on the business end, right? There'll be days out there that you will only catch fish running into the wind or quartering the wind or whatever. Now, there's a couple of things that could be telling you, right? It could be telling you that your speed, and a lot of times it's a speed indicator, I think, is that running into the wind, you're going to run slower, or at least as that boat is hitting those waves, right? What do you think it's doing down there at that crawler harness? Mm-hmm. That crawler harness is doing that. Yeah. So it's surging and stopping and surging and stopping. That blade is spinning and fluttering and spinning and fluttering. Mm-hmm. And or maybe the fish are following it, right? And they're following, and it slows down, and they react to it.
Drops down, comes back up. Oh, yeah.
So lots of little details that you can pick up from the fish's response to when you're out there. Sometimes I think late season out here for these walleyes, it has to do with the way that they're physically positioned. And when we get a north wind out here, and I know guys have heard me say this in the fishing reports before, we get a north wind out here, the current on this lake, and there's a current, picks up, and the weeds go flat. And I used to scuba dive out here, so I can tell you that that's what happens. A lot of these tall weeds go flat, and the fish, generally, fish position themselves facing current. And I think sometimes it's just that when you're trolling into the wind, you're coming up behind these fish, and literally the harness goes by them, and they go, oh, you know, and they literally go and they chase it down. But pay attention to the details, you know, what it's telling you when you're out there. We talked about, well, we've already covered, I guess, a bunch of different ways to weight a night crawler harness, right? You talked about 3-ways, bottom bouncers, inlines. One we didn't talk about was snap weights. I don't have an example up here, but basically, you want to explain to these guys what a snap weight is, just for anybody that doesn't know?
Yeah, well, snap weight is, say you got your, well, let's see. Say you got your bait out there, and you let it out, say, 20, 30 feet, let's say. Depends on the depth and everything you're at. But on your main line, then, there's like a sinker with like one of them offshore clothespin type things. You pinch that on your line, and you let more line out, because that'll help take it down. Instead of letting a ton of line out on your rod, it takes it down, the sinker's down here then, and that can help sometimes. Like I say, what that 3-way deal that I do sometimes off of boards, you get out by the St. Clair light there and stuff in the summertime, between there and that first big crib light off of Grosse Point, there's a massive weed bed that grows out there. And that, sometimes you're seeing your board jerking and stuff because that sinker's hitting and stuff. You can use the snap weight too, but that sinker's just bouncing and stuff. You see it jerking, and sometimes it's hard to tell. But you get a big enough fish on there, you see that board really get jerking and stuff. And so the snap weight just helps to get it down without having maybe something on your actual bait to make it look more natural, the bait itself, basically.
Yeah, it just gets the hardware weight stuff away from the crawler harness. So especially out here when the water gets really clear, it can be
it can
beneficial.
Then and
it collects the weeds farther away from your night crawler harness. So it keeps the stuff away and off of it. Let's talk about blade size. I mean, if it works, right?
Basically. No, I got some real small ones. I seen this one guy said he uses like size 3s or something when they try to go fast or something. And, you know, so you don't have too much thumping, just enough attraction or something. But generally 4s and 5s is all for maybe 6s for me. 5s and 6s mostly. I got different sizes and stuff, but just generally 5s and 6s for the most part for me though, really.
During the mayfly hatch, I can remember as a kid, my dad taking me, I haven't even tried to look to find these blades in years, but we used to run a tiny little, it was probably a number 2 Colorado that was made out of like a plastic or pearl material. And it was pearl colored, and we used to run that out here only during the peak of the mayfly hatch in July. And I'll tell you, we used to catch some gosh awful big walleyes on those little blades.
That sounds like those blades that used to come on those perch harnesses and stuff.
Yep.
Them real small little ones and stuff.
Yep.
Oh yeah. They don't need much down there. I've taken harnesses and or not even a harness, I guess. Just the hook and worm and just drag it out there by buoy 25. And you'd be surprised. They got to be able to see and smell and hear or something with or without attracting, but sometimes they just like something big, something small. Maybe it makes it move left or right. You just got to do different things, that's all.
And things have definitely changed out here too. I mean, going back to thinking about when I used to fish with my dad back it's probably more in the 80s, 70s and 80s, but you know, we didn't fish boards back then. As a matter of fact, when I tried to get my dad to fish boards later on, he just couldn't get into all that work. He said it was too much work, you know, running the boards. But I grew up kind of more like the hand liners out here when we trolled for walleyes. We might have 2 rods apiece, and we would run like bottom bouncers out the back of the boat with crawler harnesses on them. But we always had a rod in our hand out the side of the boat. And we would have looked like we were hand lining. And I mean, I started thinking about that when I was working on notes for this too, is that I probably grew up closer to hand lining when I fished night crawler harnesses than I did really true trolling, because we'd have a 5-foot bait caster outside of the boat, usually medium heavy, like what you guys would use for walleye jigging, and inline sinker with the crawler harness on it, and we'd let that line out till it touched the tips of the weeds. Mm-hmm. We'd crank up maybe a foot over the top of the tips of the weeds, and then all day what we would do is just slowly pull forward and drop it back. And what we were talking about, right? What happens with that crawler harness blade when you're just like if you're hitting the waves, right? It speeds up and slows down and speeds up and slows down. But the cool part was you got to feel every fish, right? So they'd come in on that crawler harness and you'd feel them, and then you'd start to pull forward. And then if they let go, if you didn't have one on, you drop it back. And I can remember sometimes I'd see my dad leaning back in the side of the boat on the other side, right? and then we had the flipping switches like you guys use too for jigging, right? A lot of you guys use flipping switches when you're jigging walleyes. Had a flipping switch on those reels too, so that after you ran out of arm, then you'd hit the button, right? And then a lot of times by the time you let off, the fish would be on there, right? But that's how I learned to fish night crawler harnesses, and just about everything else was like the handliners do. So everything was a feel thing, right? So you could feel where the weed tops were, you could feel where the bait was, you could feel your night crawler harness spinning, you knew when it was gunked up.
Well, I think everybody here is in the walleye club, ain't they? Or should be. But nah, just kidding. But no, there's a brother, sister in our club, the cook. We call them the Cookies, Rich and Joanne Cook, and they handline a ton, and it's kind of a harness, but it's got a treble hook on it, just real short ones with the blade and all this stuff. And they might have maybe 2 hooks, one a bigger hook up front here to hook the worm here, then the treble hook back here with the tail sticking out a little bit, and they pull that with their actual wire line and stuff along the channel edges and stuff, out in the lake sometimes, and they do good. It's just a different variation of a harness, really, but they're using it with hand line and stuff, so that works really good too.
Now to come back a little bit to the blade size, I know if Rob was here, I can probably say that Rob would probably be way more technical about the blade size and stuff. I'm guessing he would say that in dirty water out there, run bigger blades, get more thump and stuff like that.
He probably would.
He probably would. And I mean, as the color thing, I mean, you got any general rules you go by for colors other than
your perches and stuff? Like I say, that brownish blade bait when
during the mayfly hatch, especially
during the hatch, that's going pretty decent. That always seemed to be pretty good. And years ago, when gold wasn't so expensive, those Hildebrand blades, I got some from 30 years ago. I ain't even touching them. I just keep them.
Real gold plated.
Real gold blades. Them things that shine on them just works good. And it just some years, some things seem to work good. That what they call Pepto-Bismol. It's man, I can't even remember who made them. It was just local guys that made them. I don't even know who it was anymore. And then for a while, somebody come out with some crushed glass they put in. And they had one called Screw You Blade. It was white with a red kind of squiggly line. One of the old river rats come up with that color combination. And they had crushed glass in it. That thing for a few years worked really great. I haven't run it too much lately. Just that you took the blade, if you're in the shop, you just looked at it. It looked okay. You go outside and you see all these little glints of light from the sun. Just all that glass in there and stuff. And that worked really good for a long time. Antifreezes are always good, the perch blades, and everybody's got their favorites. And I really have none. I got so many different ones I try and stuff, and some of them are already on the pole from like last week. I put it back out again, it still works. So it's a combination of stuff, really.
Yeah, being in the tackle store retail business, I can tell you guys that there's the last couple of years especially, and last year was and it has more to do with the colors on the back of the blades, especially where I've been seeing the patterns.
That's what some people have been
So
saying.
especially last year, it was kind of like pink. They call it antifreeze pink, but it's like a candy pink on the back of the blades was really hot. Same thing with the antifreeze color, which is candy yellow on the back of the blades, which has been really hot. And when you think about it from a fish's perspective, when that blade is spinning around, they see the back side as much as they see the front side, right? Because they're seeing, depending on the angle, I mean, they're seeing the back side of the blade. So, I mean, that's been definitely the real deal. And we'll see those patterns that way because, I mean, obviously, if you guys are hammering fish on a certain colored blade, you're going to come in here to the tackle store, and I'm going to see when you clean that whole peg off, I know it's a good color for you, right?
Yep.
I know something. And when 5 guys come in and they're all telling me the same thing, and it's usually that, like I was saying, it's been that back color has been most important.
Yeah.
But on the other side of the coin, I'll have guys that'll come in and absolutely swear up and down that there's only one blade that they can catch fish on right now, right? And that if they don't have that blade, they can't catch any fish, and then we all laugh because there'll be another guy that comes in that it's the exact opposite color, you know what I mean? And they're saying that's the only one that they can catch fish on.
Exactly.
You know there's something else going on out there besides the color. But definitely those back colors have been kind of a big deal the last couple of years.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
What about bead color? Do you think bead color matters even as much as the blade color, or?
I don't really know on that either. I got all kinds of different styles and colors, and I buy them beads at shops where people make craft stuff.
Yep.
You know, them Swarovski beads and different things, or just all kinds of different patterns and stuff. Some guys have a ton of them on there to make a bigger looking profile for bigger fish to get, you know, because they can see it better, or the fish don't have to expend as much energy because they're getting a bigger dinner or something, I don't know. But it's got a lot of different colors, you know, greens and reds always good, and gold and black, and that's some of the standard stuff. And I throw some pinks on there sometimes, and I just mix and match. And again, I try when I make my harnesses, especially if I make some doubles and stuff too, but most of it's a lot of single stuff. So I'll have my hook down here, let's say, and I'll put some beads on there so they don't really go past the blade per se. And that blade just flipping and flopping around the color of the beads and stuff, and then I'll put another one on top of it, and you loop the line through there, and you slide that bead down so that blade doesn't have a tendency to walk up. Because years and years ago, Jerry Fox Sr. said, this is going back a long time now, somebody was running harnesses, and they had somehow an underwater camera or something. Jerry got in with all these professional guys and stuff, but supposedly at a certain harmonic frequency, which Ron knows about, the blade actually started running up the line. So them guys back in the day, they put a bead in there, put a toothpick in there to keep that blade from riding up.
So they would lock it so it couldn't walk up. I've never thought about that.
Oh yeah. So that's one thing I do. I always put that on there to keep that blade down there. It can walk up.
Yeah, I was going to say that, you know, for me, bead color, there's definitely a couple of pet colors that historically, like when I was talking about with my dad when we would run that pearl blade, it was always with yellow beads, like a yellow faceted bead. I mean, that was that color combo. And then one of the other ones, a traditional one, and we still sell it in here today. And it's not because we make them; it's just because it's carried on, and that's like a gold blade with red beads. I mean, that's been always a traditional, established color out here, right? You're nodding your head. You're like, yeah, I caught a lot of fish on that one too. And then like silver patterns with chartreuse type beads.
Of the standard ones,
you know, those are just always been standard colors. And I guess for me, crawler harnesses, sometimes I'd put a contrasting bead, maybe a black bead, or just a very, like if I had chartreuse body beads, we'll call them, like a red bead or a silver bead or a gold bead or a contrasting bead up above. And I always thought it was like an eyeball. You know, whether the fish thought it was like an eyeball or not, I have no idea. But again, over time, you got certain harnesses that produce and other harnesses that don't, and you start, just like with your trolling, right? You're picking out patterns. And so you find patterns that are kind of, that work for you. And maybe it's just because it gives you confidence. I don't know. It might, but on the other side of the coin, if it gives you confidence, it's because you're catching fish. So pay attention to those things that give you confidence, right? Because there's something going on there, you know. We talked about hooks already, and we talked about slow death and all that.
Some guys actually put scent on them also on top of it, especially using a plastic worm or something too.
Yep.
But these plastic worms, especially if you start getting a lot of perch and stuff, these plastic worms. In fact, umpteen years ago when they had the white perch that came out here, remember them years ago?
Yep.
There was zillions of them, and we'd be trolling out there and they're worse than the perch. And I wish they'd still make them. Uncle Josh pork rinds. I used to put that on a harness.
We got those now.
The
real pork rinds now. They're back.
Are they?
Yeah.
Not that garbage they come out with.
Real pork. They brought them back.
No kidding.
Oh yeah, we got them.
Them things work great. You can get 18 million fish hit them, and you can tell if it's a bigger fish or not. You just pull it away from them, rip it out of their mouth, and keep it down there until something big hits it or something. I used to use them all the time, and then, like John said, they went away, and I'm gonna have to check it out myself here now.
Yep, they brought them back. They even got a night crawler that's made out of real pork now.
Oh
again.
yeah. I have to check that out because them things work great. Keep them wet, and you're all good.
Well, you're bringing me right into one of the other things I was going to talk about. We talked about reel worms, right, and how to hook them, and yeah, I mean you can. So don't put your Wyandotte worms away at the end of jigging season. Okay, keep them in your boat. And on those days that you're out here trolling, and I mean, we get some, don't get me wrong, I like catching perch, okay? And I like catching big perch, and they're bonus fish when you're trolling for walleyes. Mm-hmm. But sometimes they're keeping you from catching walleyes because they're just tearing your night crawlers up, right? And yeah, back in those white perch days, which was the 80s, and I know most of you guys looking around out here, you're of the same year classes that would remember those days with all the white perch. It was like piranhas. Oh, man. You could, if you took a perch rig with crawlers on it and you dropped it down in the water, it was like the water would almost like boil with these stinking white perch that were out here. And they were all about that big. They were useless. They weren't even like big white perch that they net out in Erie. And you could not run crawler harnesses. I mean, it was horrible. You couldn't keep live bait down in the water. They would just tear it up. So we learned back then we had to come up with different ways to get around that whole fiasco. So we did start experimenting with rubber worms, and same thing down on Erie, because I used to troll down on Erie a lot with crawler harnesses, and I would run rubber worms. And down there, the only difference was I would run bigger stuff. Yeah. So up here I would run, like the Wyandotte worms, and like this one, this brown with the red tail, was like a classic one. And we would run that one, but then down on Erie I would even run up to like 7-inch, like big culprit bass worms. I mean, that crawler harness would be like that long with that stinking worm on there. But man, would we catch some big walleyes on it, and it was because we could keep that bait down there. And we could run it right through the perch schools then. So you didn't have to try to stay away from the perch. Then we used to target those perch schools, and we would run right through them and pull walleyes out.
Yeah, because they're eating perch.
Because they're eating perch, exactly. So you got to keep your bait down there, and if it's constantly getting fleeced, it doesn't do you any good. So that's when the rubber worms shine.
Yeah, or on a three-way, you could use those little walleye spoons too. Tip them with a little worm, real worm, plastic worm, or Uncle Josh pork rinds. And like John's saying, that super big stuff, fish don't have hands. If they want to really check something out, they got to put their mouth on it. Whether it's a reaction or hunger or whatever, but they don't have hands. They got to grab it to really understand it, I guess, and try to eat it, apparently.
Yeah, that's true, right? They got to put their mouth on it. I don't know. I guess I had one more topic on here. I guess if we had time, and we're about at the hour mark, so I guess we could hit this one a little bit. Although it could probably almost do an entire seminar on this last one all by itself. But Rods and reels for, especially rods for crawler harnesses. What do you like in a good crawler harness rod?
My 7-foot ugly stick. They wear like iron. I've had some for 35 years and they're still going strong. Certain situations, things work a little better and stuff. Some guys use real long 8-9 footers and stuff, so you get this slow sweep and stuff, which can work, you know, that's no problem. But I'm just so used to my ugly sticks, I use them almost exclusively for everything. But I do have some longer ones. In fact, just this last year I started playing around. I had some spinning, like bass style reels, them 7-footers, you know, that type of thing. I was putting 2 and 3 ounce inline sinkers on them with a single hook harness and trolling like 2 miles an hour out in Anchor Bay, getting all kind of stuff. Walleyes, perch, they just whanging them things. And I was even holding on to the rod, just playing around. A big perch, they'll just, all these fish are hungry sometimes, that's for sure. But so I experiment with that. But generally speaking, my ugly sticks, I just like them.
Yeah, especially you got to think about it this way. So like for the application I was talking about with when I was holding the rods, that generally is going to be a graphite rod because you're going to want to feel what's going on down there. You're feeling your crawler harness, you're feeling the weed tops, you're feeling all that stuff. But if you're running boards, you're just running bottom bouncers, okay? You're not holding the rod most of the time anyways. You're not really trying to feel anything. If anything, you're watching what's going on the rod tips or what's going on down at the boards. So you don't need really a fancy, you know, highly sensitive to the touch rod. So you're generally looking at glass rods. I mean, an ugly stick's a good example of a fiberglass rod. I mean, so what the other nice thing about that too is, especially if we got people out there that are just getting started, it doesn't cost you an arm and a leg to get into pulling crawler harnesses. You got fiberglass rods. You know, definitely having a line counter, even if it's a cheap line counter, is going to be an advantage, especially if you're running inlines and things, because you're going to control how far your baits are out. But you don't have to. I mean, back in the day when we couldn't afford line counters, a lot of times we would take rubber band. Yeah, on a level wind. On a level wind, we would count the passes, right? We would say 1, 2, 3, and write it down in a little notebook. 3 passes out. The other thing we used to do is tie off rubber bands onto our main line, and you could tie off that rubber band and then tie it right off at the spool. So like even on a spinning rod, right? You tie it right off there, you loop it and pull it tight, and that becomes your 0 point. And then if you want to go out farther, you just let it out farther, right? I mean, so a lot of times we would do that. So I mean, I didn't probably have my first level line line counter reel for 10 years, right? Back in the day, you didn't have a lot of options on it. So a lot of those old tricks I still remember, and occasionally I'll still use them too, depending on what I'm doing. But yeah, so you don't need a fancy rod and reel combo, and walleyes aren't great fighting fish. You don't need a $300 line counter. I mean, you're just trying to get line out and have a rough idea how much line you got out. So, you know, it's not going to break the bank.
That's very true for the harnesses, that's for sure.
You got anything else you want to bring up? You want to tell these guys words of wisdom with all your years of experience out here? Anything we missed?
You don't want me to talk about the DNR, do you?
No, we'll avoid any of that.
No, like John said, it doesn't take a lot for harnesses and stuff, and it's like anything else. A lot of guys start using them more when the water warms up. You get a little more weed cover because you start pulling crankbaits. Crankbaits will still work. Them wiggle warts and Hottentots and the bandits and the dead eyes now and hit sticks and all these. But a lot of times they just get hung up in the weeds and stuff. So then you're not really being efficient, I guess, for lack of a better word. And I like them all. I do it all. But the harnesses, you just let it bounce in there. If it gets weeds, you just shake it and it knocks them off and just put it back down there. You can just be more efficient and stuff. And I've caught muskies on them. Big walleyes, small walleyes, bluegill, just all kinds of stuff, really. You'd be surprised.
Moon eyes.
Oh, yeah, moon eyes. Yep, them too in the channels. But you can, in the old days, we used to drift for pickerel back then in St. Clair River with bottom bouncers and stuff. They're so versatile, and it's relatively cheap compared to these $15, $20 banded baits nowadays and stuff, that's for sure. But yeah, it's pretty simple and easy though, really. Just got to put some time on the water though. And the big thing I tell everybody, some of these guys won't tell you their secrets or their hot spots because they're the best in the world and all that stuff. But get some friends. Like I say, I've been in a walleye club for years. You get to know people. You got to have a little bit of network because one day some guy's out there doing good, he can tell you a little something. And if you go out there and you do good, or if you go out a bunch like me, even though some of these guys ain't telling you their secrets, you see the same boat in the same spot for 3 out of 4 days in a row, you can put 2 and 2 together. But try to get a little network with guys. Don't be afraid to tell them nothing. It ain't no big secret. Just get a little network going, that's all. Or try to, anyhow.
Yeah, I guess what Don just said, probably I could have opened this whole thing up with, and that is that the Nightcrawler harness is probably your most versatile tool out there for catching walleyes. And it's because you can fish it high, you can fish it low, you can drift it, you can troll it, you can shorten it up and cast it. I mean, if Justin was here right now, he used to always talk about the weapons rigs, which is basically a shortened version of Nightcrawler harness, right? So just a little shorty, and you can cast them. So, but it's probably your most versatile tool out here, and you can adjust it. You can put big blades on them. You can put small blades on them. You can fish artificials on them. You can fish live bait on them. But it's still a Nightcrawler harness. So however you choose to fish it, it's still a crawler harness, and it's going to catch fish. So it's just crazy, very simple, effective bait for walleyes. And I guess with that, is there any questions out here from anybody?
Since we're allowed 3 rods per angler and 6 lures, do you ever run pairs of harnesses on a rod?
More of a 3-way setup, with maybe a spoon or a body bait or something, but not 2 harnesses normally, because sometimes you get that kind of craziness going on and stuff, but I don't anyhow, no.
Yeah, I never have either. I mean, same thing. Sometimes I'll run a 3-way rig and have a crankbait down on the short lead, and then usually it's a spoon on the back. I'm trying to remember if I probably have run a crawler harness off of the long lead before, but never 2 harnesses at one time.
Yeah, not 2 harnesses, because it's like pulling wire sometimes. If you're hand lining and you get a weed on this one bait here and it starts doing this and it gets into everything else, and so that's why with the 3-way, you got some separation with a body bait, let's say in a spoon or a harness or something, but yeah.
Since you like pork rinds, have you ever tried the skin, the belly skin?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I've caught some walleyes out there before. They got what they call them silver lampreys out here. And if you can hold them sons of bitches and put that hook through their mouth, them fish will eat them things up and they're like leather. But yeah, definitely that.
You can run a leech on a crawler harness.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Especially if we were in Minnesota right now, the guys in the audience would probably be yelling at me saying, "Well, why aren't you talking about leeches?"
If you want to touch them.
Yeah, I hate leeches.
I can't do them.
But you keep them real cold, they're not too bad. You let them get warm, and they get a little.
Humphrey Bogart.
Yeah, but
Beggars.
More questions?
Sometimes you can run them too fast and that blade really gets to going.
Yeah.
And if you don't have like a good sample ball bearing on there or something, you get that line twist and stuff. And so sometimes some of my harnesses, I'll make them up and I'll use that Mason hard line for the line because it's pretty stiff stuff to try to keep some of that spinning stuff around. But sample swivels will help to really do that in that hard line basically. Because you get them spinning too fast and it just gets them all really spun up really. Some guys have actually had them, they're spinning so much.
They'll cut right through the
they cut right through the line. So you can put a different clevis
especially with
on there.
that style of clevis.
Yeah,
I mean,
that
some
style
of the
of clevis,
wire,
yeah.
like the wire ones or the
Yeah, the
ones
North
with
Fork.
the North Fork ones, the plastic ones will handle it better. I was
Yeah.
going to say miles per hour. You're putting a number on it. What would you say, like 3-ish? I mean, that's pretty smoking hot, right?
Yeah,
like
I
two,
would say so.
2.5.
Yeah,
I mean,
you can tell if you're really seeing it thumping and pulling and stuff, and you bring it in and all curls up on it or something.
The other
Too
thing is, the
fast.
faster you go, the higher it goes. And if you start getting into those higher speeds, it's kind of hard for me to figure out where the hell I am in the water column too, you know?
Some
because
of that.
That was one of the other things we didn't talk about. Is like, so the dike crawler harnesses, even though it's crazy versatile, it's still kind of a complicated thing as far as speed and blade size and all that. And when you're trying to develop patterns, like the smaller the blade you go, the less it's going to climb in the water column at a certain speed, right? And the less resistance it's got. The bigger the blade you go, the more resistance it's got, the higher it comes up in the water column. So you can adjust your depth, you can control your weight, you can control your speed all being equal. You change your blade size, it runs at a completely different depth than where you normally would. So anyways, I don't know if that answered your question, but usually if I'm going to start running that hot, I'm going to just start running crankbaits.
Yeah.
If the fish are that aggressive and that hot, I might as well just be running a crankbait out there and getting them. Or I'll slow down and cast to them, just completely change it all up. And I'd rather catch them casting anyway.
Yeah.
So, well, if that's all the questions we got, thanks for coming out. And don't forget to go out. Right now, you can run crawler harnesses and catch fish. So. Oh yes, you can drift with them too. Oh yeah. Yep.
Sometimes we used to drift with not even no weight.
Well, it's
Oh yeah.
Spinner, depends on the wind.
so the mouth of
Oh,
the
yeah.
Detroit River right now.
Out in front of the Fort Hart Club.
Yep.
Yeah.
Keep making wind down.
Yeah.
I've taken many limits right in that corner coming out of Alter Road, right as the river starts.
Yeah.
Just drifting with, I call it naked crawler harnesses, just to crawl, literally the crawler harness and nothing else on there because it's shallow water. But problem now is to do that with the water as clear as it gets now out here is having the right conditions is tough to find anymore.
The water's definitely cleaned up.
With it
that's
that
for sure.
clean, because you got to get it away from the boat. So I guess you could still do it that way. It's just harder to figure out, again, where you are in the water column once you start getting that much line out.
Yeah.
But-
That's true.
But yeah, good point though. You can definitely drift crawler harnesses. You don't have to cast them. You don't have to troll them.
yeah.
You can drift them. They work just fine.
Well,
Yep.
in fact, our club, I don't know, myself, Keith Critch, a couple other guys, we did a small boat segment and stuff. Because like you say, some of these guys got all these big ones and stuff. We tried to just do a small boat thing. We were just drifting by Algonac with harnesses and things and whatever, like old school and stuff. And it still works, exactly. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Hey,
All
to
that
shout
stuff.
out to Rob Hoover out there. Sorry you couldn't make it for this, Rob. You're probably still stuck in traffic.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
we'll get you in here for talking about pulling bandits.
Yeah,
How's
there
that?
you
So
go.
we'll have you in here, and that's more your wheelhouse anyway. So we'll see you next time. Thanks again from Sportsmen Direct for joining us, and we'll see you at the next seminar. Hey, if you like this video content and you want to get updated as soon as the next video is out there, hit that subscribe button and a little bell icon, and you'll get notified as soon as the next video is up.